Hello everyone, welcome to this video. In this video I'd like to talk to you about how COVID-19 vaccine will most likely affect the economy, businesses, the stock exchange, and gold prices. So without any further ado, let's jump into the topic. COVID-19, of course, here is at the essence because the vaccine is a COVID-19 vaccine. And to be able to understand the implications and the effects of this vaccine, we need to understand how COVID-19 affected our lives, and with that, of course, the whole world. So we talked about this already a bit in previous videos, but for everybody to be on the same line and to be able to understand what's going to come after this part, we need to provide a solid foundation. So let's first of all talk about briefly how COVID-19 rocked our world. So COVID-19 affects our health, right? We know that. But there are also other illnesses that affect our health as well. So why is COVID-19 so different? Well, first of all, it spreads very quickly, and with that you can have a lot of cases in a very short time span, and that's a problem, and that's also why there's a pandemic currently. Secondly, COVID-19 is relatively deadly compared to many other viruses, which again makes it very important that you can reduce the amount of cases of COVID-19 and also COVID-19 deaths in the end. So taking this all together, it's not very difficult to understand that first of all, policymakers try to enforce rules and regulations to prevent COVID-19 spread and with that, deaths. Secondly, it's also, I think, not that difficult to understand that such an environment affects us psychologically as well, because it's an environment that's quite chaotic, and of course this fear of possibly getting sick and dying, or at least living in such an uncertain environment, of course does affect us psychologically. And these two mechanisms are very important to understand when we're going to talk about how COVID-19 and a vaccine of COVID-19 affects economy, businesses, the stock exchange, and gold prices. So let's start with rules and regulations that policymakers try to enforce in such an environment. And so the essence here is, of course, as said, that the virus spreads quickly, but the spreading, of course, happens in a very specific way, which is through interaction. So as a policymaker, if you can make sure that people move around much less, and that way, if you can prevent them from spreading the virus, or even if you can completely lock the country down, if you can make sure that they're at home throughout the incubation period of about 2 to 3 weeks, then you can exactly diagnose who is ill and who is not, and then of course you can effectively treat these people. So oftentimes what you see is that you get lockdowns, or you at least will have rules and regulations that will prevent how freely you can walk around, in which regions you can walk around, during which hours you can walk around. Sometimes these rules and regulations will restrict the opening hours of shops, and all of this together, if you can be less outside, or if it can be, for only shorter time periods in shops, of course, it's very straightforward that this is going to affect physical shopping. You cannot walk around as much as you want, you cannot go everywhere as freely as you want, and shops will be shorter open. Well, then it's very simple that there will be less demand for products physically, and with this there will be less sales, and with this, of course, shops will earn less, so they will have less income. Of course, a part of all of this will be substituted by online shopping. People will stay at home, so they will shop online. But of course, you cannot buy everything online, and even if you can, you may not want to because it's not the same experience, so you may want to postpone this until the moment that you can actually buy things again physically. So the second part, of course, is psychology. So think about it. You're in this environment, right? This fearful, chaotic environment. You don't know what's going to happen, right? You don't know what's going to happen with your job, with your income, with the world. You don't know when the virus is again going to, disappear. And in such an environment, again, you will reduce the amount of spending you do, even if you can do some online purchases, right? And so again, psychological burden on you will make sure that you will be demanding less products, be it physically or online, and this will again reduce the sales of shops, and this will again make sure that these shops have less of an income. So if you are a business and if you are faced with a situation where your income drops, then in such a situation, of course, you're automatically thinking about reducing costs, right? So you can fire people, you can close business units. These are quite straightforward decisions that most businesses take. But the question is, how much costs can you cut, right? There is an end to it. You cannot cut all of the costs, because then the business will completely disappear. And so, yes, you can fire people, but you cannot fire all of them. You can close business units, but you cannot close all of them. And oftentimes what we've seen in this COVID-19 environment is that costs dropped much less, much slower than income actually dropped, because you saw quite drastic measures, lockdowns, partial lockdowns, tight restrictions that really hurt the income side, and cost cutting could not really match it. Some companies also did not want to cut too many costs, because they were quite optimistic about these regulations and rules and restrictions again disappearing and life going back to normal. But hey, they were quite mistaken, as we see currently. And so if income drops more than the costs, which is oftentimes the case in this COVID-19 environment, we see a loss of profit. And of course, this is a big issue. But things go much deeper than just a loss of profit for these companies, because less demand means less production, right? Because if a business can sell less, then it's going to produce more, because why should you produce something that you're not able to sell? So as they seek to cut costs, they're going to produce less. But if they produce less, they will need less workers. So this is going to mean increase of unemployment, but it's also going to mean that there are going to be less investments, which of course is going to hurt country and company innovativeness. Less production also means less imports, right? And at the same time, less demand for products also means less exports from other countries to your country, right? Or from your country to abroad. So we see here that production is affected, employment is affected, investments is affected, imports are affected as an input to production, and exports are affected because other countries, other companies don't want to buy your products anymore. And so altogether, what we've experienced is a collapse of global trade, and with that, of the global economy. So now let's get back to the news on vaccines, because that's why you guys are here most likely. And so, even news, just news about the vaccine, without the vaccine being around yet, but even news is very important, because economies thrive on confidence and trust, right? You see always, like in quarters or every year, you see numbers regarding consumer confidence, consumer trust, investor confidence, investor trust, and so on, regarding how they perceive the economy. Confidence and trust in the economy, in a better tomorrow, is super important. And so if consumer trust goes up, if their confidence in the future goes up, they will spend more. Especially this psychological mechanism will become less of an issue. And so as they spend more, especially online, you will see that production will go up with this, investment will go up, and again trade, be it imports for example, their direct purchases, or for production, or exports, because the same thing is also going to happen abroad. Whichever, in general, trade will go up. And if investor trust goes up and investor confidence goes up, you'll again see that they're going to invest in production, they're going to invest in innovation, they're going to invest in trade, and that's great. So of course, when the vaccine is there, all of this is going to be accelerated and it's going to go much faster. But just the news already is very important for economic recovery, and the vaccine will even speed recovery much further. So how is all of this affecting sectors, businesses, and stocks? The interesting thing here is that it's not going to affect everybody equally, okay? Because COVID-19 also did not affect everybody, every company, every sector equally. What we saw very interesting is that some sectors, some companies, and some stocks were actually very positively affected by COVID, and others were actually quite negatively affected. And so when the vaccine news comes up, which is already around basically at the time of this video, the Pfizer vaccine in cooperation with BioNTech, and the Moderna vaccine, both of them have been announced already, but they're not yet around in terms of, they're not yet used for vaccinating. But already this news, you see having some implications on the stock market, but you will also see this actually in actual recovery of these sectors. How? let's first talk about the negative effects of COVID-19 on businesses. One of the biggest effects in negative terms on businesses, and of course with that also on the stocks, was on transportation. Because when you transport people from A to B, oftentimes it's in closed spaces. Transportation basically is already a sector that's based on trust, because you're not driving, right? Somebody is driving for you and you're in this space with other people. Especially in COVID-19 situation, you don't know who is ill and who is not. And of course, you also don't know whether the transportation company actually did their maintenance, did their investments, and did their due diligence in a good way to ensure that everybody is going to be safe. And so transportation was massively hit here because people said, hey, you know, perhaps I shouldn't use public transportation, perhaps I shouldn't use cabs, perhaps I should just do my own transportation myself. And so this negative impact on transportation was massively held. But if you get a vaccine, and if the virus disappears, then of course there's going to be a surge in demand for transportation, and you will see that transportation as a business, as a sector, and of course stocks regarding transportation, such as for example aviation, but also for example Uber in terms of passenger transportation, these are of course going to get this massive positive effect. Finance, of course, as a sector is very important. Finance as a sector, of course, thrives on commissions. If there are financial transactions, then these commissions, of course, are very important for the financial sector. And also lending, for example, and the interest paid over loans is very important to the financial sector. But in a COVID-19 environment, you see, of course, economic activity drop. If economic activity drops, and if you don't have that many financial transactions, if people don't borrow that much money, then of course you see that income from interest is going to decrease. You see commissions income is going to decrease, and the finance sector as a whole is going to get a massive blow. And that's what we have seen, for example, banks being hit severely. Again, with the vaccine, not only the news, but also actually with the vaccine coming up, you will see more loans being demanded. You will see more transactions happening as people are going to spend more money. And with that, of course, the financial sector is going to thrive. Energy, very important. Again, actually the same reasoning regarding economic activity. If there's economic activity, if there's more production through investment, through trade, and through demand, then you will of course see a demand for energy, right? Electricity, oil, gas, all sorts of energy, but also sustainable energy, for example. You will see being demanded much more. And of course, this demand is going to be of massive importance in terms of these companies being able to recover on the income side of things. Because of course, as income dropped, and as these companies are oftentimes very expensive in terms of their operations, they were massively hit by COVID-19, and a vaccine is really going to be a push in the back for these companies. Together with energy, actually steel is also a business that was very much affected by COVID-19, because steel is of course very important for production, right? And as it is very important for production, as it is very important for industry in general, COVID-19 disappearance, a vaccine that's effective in getting rid of COVID-19 will also of course increase the demand for steel, as this demand was not around that much during COVID-19. As economic activity slumped, we saw steel companies particularly get massively hit, and this of course also expected to flip. Trade, we talked about it, right? Trade will most likely surge. Some companies thrive on trade. They will help other companies export or import, right? They will sometimes give credit to these companies. Sometimes they will give consulting on it. Everything related to trade most likely is going to surge, as we're also expecting trade to increase because of an increase of demand in general of economic activity. So demand on the consumer side, but also demand on the business side. Restaurants, gyms, cinemas, all sorts of places where people are for recreational purposes, they don't have to be there, but they can be there. Well, especially this can part is very important. People chose not to go to these places because they were closed spaces, and in a closed area, just like actually with transportation, it's of course much more likely that you will get sick. People chose to stay at home, do their sports at home, eat at home, watch a movie through whatever streaming platform at home. And of course, these businesses got a massive hit by COVID-19. And again, as the vaccine proves itself to be useful and effective, it's very much expected that these businesses will benefit a lot from a COVID-19 vaccine. So now let's talk about the positive, right? So some companies were actually positively affected by COVID-19 and actually got many benefits out of this chaotic situation. So think about, streaming companies. People stay at home, they have to do some stuff at home, some recreational stuff. Well, why not watch stuff via Netflix, Disney Plus, Hulu, ESPN, Amazon Prime Video, whatever comes to your mind. People stay at home, they spend their time at home, so they're going to do stuff at home. If they can't go to cinemas, they will go and watch a movie, documentary, or series through streaming. And so there was a massive demand increase for streaming services, expected, of course, to flip, to decrease as people will spend their time elsewhere. Sporting at home, as a substitute for sporting in gyms, of course, was received by a lot of demand. But again, if the vaccine proves to be useful, people may cease their sporting at home and choose again to sport in the gym. And so you will see home sports in terms of perhaps streaming of how to sport at home, services or sales of equipment. In terms of home sports, we will see a demand decrease in all of these areas. Food delivery as a substitute, of course, to restaurants. Food delivery got a huge demand increase, and we saw many companies like, again, for example, Uber, invest actually in this area to get a massive benefit out of this, as people couldn't go to restaurants, but some people were too busy or simply didn't want to cook at home, so they ordered, of course, food as a substitution to restaurants, and we saw a massive demand increase for food delivery. E-commerce in general, right? Online shopping, as people didn't go out for physical shopping or couldn't go out for physical shopping. People chose to order things increasingly, but as physical shopping again becomes much more the norm, people will go out, and this will of course substitute again the market share of online shopping, and we'll again see e-commerce platforms possibly get a decrease in demand, and with that a decrease in income, at least not the income they experienced throughout the COVID-19 period. Bookshops, the physical bookshops most likely were negatively affected. People wouldn't go to a bookshop because the possibility of COVID-19 contraction. But on the other side of things, ebook demand, of course, would surge in such a situation because people, would order them, would watch them on their, whatever, read them on their hardware. They don't have to go physically out per se. It's actually the same idea of e-commerce. You can just order whatever you want, right? Gaming, very interesting here. Gaming platforms, consoles. But also the newer like e-gaming platforms from Google, from Microsoft, these of course got a surge in demand because people stayed at home. They have to spend their time in one way or another. So hey, why not game at home, and why not spend our time in that way? Cloud services, a lot of businesses, because people had to work from home, there was much more demand for computer power, for being able to do things on a distance. So a lot of companies actually invested in their infrastructure, in their computing power, in being able to do things from away, and of course this led to an increase in demand for cloud services. Finally, one thing that I would like to talk to you about is telecommunication. Again, if people are at home, they need better internet, faster internet. They perhaps need also better phone packages, because again, all of these services, there's going to be much more demand for it. In such a situation, it's of course not very difficult to understand that telecommunication companies are going to get an increase in demand. But again, when the vaccine is around, you again see this of course flip. So the interesting thing here is that for all of this, for all of these businesses, for all of these sectors, if a company was negatively affected by COVID-19, the vaccine of course will make this flip. It will make sure that all of this negative again goes back to the positive, as people will go out and will be able to spend their money in a physical way again. Again, every industry and every sector and every business with that was positively affected by COVID-19 because people stayed at home and spent their time there through all of these e-benefits, online shopping or spending time at home. Of course, it is not that difficult to understand that as people are going to spend their time elsewhere again, outside again, demand for these things are going to decrease, and with that, these companies are going to lose some of their precious demand and income. So the negative is going to turn to the positive, and the positive is going to turn to the negative, provided that people have not permanently changed their habits, which I seriously doubt. And of course, this demand shift And this income shift will also reflect itself to the stock market. Actually, we will see a recovery in stocks much sooner than a recovery in the actual business itself, because don't forget, investors buy the rumor and sell the news. So if people already get the news that the vaccine is going to come out, investors will sort this out. They will understand that some stocks are going to increase because the company behind it is going to increase, right? Because a stock resembles, of course, the company. And so if a company is going to do better, most likely that company is going to become more of value. So that stock is going to become more of value as well, because people are going to demand that stock. So an investor in time will actually purchase the stock of any of these sectors and industries I just named that are expected to move from the negative to the positive, to be able to actually benefit from this income increase that will come from a demand increase, from, again, recovering world, from a recovering economy. So finally, we need to talk about gold here. So gold is very interesting. We talked about it in previous videos. The value of gold is of itself, and because of that, in these times like COVID, in moments of chaos, of course, people go to gold because money might lose its value, because the countries behind them might suffer, like unemployment, a tax income decrease because of economic activity decrease, and so on. But all of this is not affecting gold, because gold is a precious metal, right? It is the value we give to gold that is it has a value of itself. With money, that's not the case. If you have a $100 piece of paper, the paper is worth 5 cents, 10 cents, something like that, but it is $100 because we say it's $100, right? With gold, this is not the case. It is precious. And so in these times, of course, in COVID-19 times, we see people go towards gold, demand gold, stock it up to make sure that they're not going to affect it in monetary ways from the COVID-19 pandemic. But now when this is going to flip, of course, people are going to again sell gold and move towards money. Why? Because gold is difficult to transfer. You can't pay really with gold. You need money for this. And if you're going to purchase more, if you're going to invest, if you're going to do financial transactions, for all of this you need money. And so people will sell gold, move towards money to be able to spend actually their money as the economy is expected to recover, as trust comes back, as confidence comes back. And for all of this, again, the vaccine is very, very important. I hope you enjoyed the video. If so, please don't forget to hit the like and the subscribe buttons. I wish you all the best in the world and hope to see you again anytime soon. Take care.